are nest cameras. They are nest cameras, plural, and that whoever did this may have smashed those cameras, plural. So
before delving into the details of this investigation, it is crucial to state that all information presented is derived from verified reports by established news organizations, publicly accessible records, and sourced commentary from named individuals. In any instance where information originates from a lone source, I will make that explicitly clear. When offering my own analysis, I will identify it as such, distinguishing it from established fact. No person featured in this account is officially named a suspect in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. This case remains an active federal investigation. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Her family is owed answers. And this examination is committed solely to the verifiable facts. The narrative thus far has centered on the front doorbell camera. You are aware that its connection was severed at 1:47 in the morning on the 1st of February. The disturbing image has been widely circulated. A gloved hand reaching toward the lens, methodically disabling the one camera positioned to record faces, vehicles, or any approach to the front of the home. It is a known fact that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was forced to bypass the device entirely, going directly to Google's back-end server infrastructure to retrieve any residual data that might have survived the camera's destruction. This specific piece of the story has been scrutinized relentlessly, and for good reason, because that front doorbell camera provides the most glaring evidence that whoever abducted Nancy Guthrie arrived with a plan. They were aware of its exact location. They understood the necessity of disabling it, and they executed that task successfully. However, there is another aspect of this that demands our attention today. While the entire public discourse surrounding the surveillance evidence has remained fixated on that single doorbell camera, another, more complex layer of the security system at Nancy Guthrie's residence has been almost completely overlooked. A network of additional cameras provided coverage for the backyard, the side of the property, and the pool area. These were motion-activated units which, according to sources briefed on the investigation, were successfully recovered by the FBI and had been actively capturing images. On the night Nancy vanished, several of those cameras were left entirely undisturbed. The FBI retrieved footage from these devices, and a source with direct knowledge of the investigation disclosed to ABC News precisely what those cameras recorded on the night of the abduction. These fully functional cameras, triggered by motion and strategically placed across the rear half of Nancy Guthrie's property, captured something profoundly telling. To use the source's exact words, they captured, quote, "nothing suspicious." And when a source connected to a federal kidnapping investigation was prompted to describe the significance of that finding, the reality that cameras monitoring the back and side of the property recorded nothing unusual on the night Nancy was taken, they offered a single, chilling descriptor: odd. If you have followed this case from the beginning, that particular word should resonate with a deep sense of unease. In the lexicon of federal investigators, individuals who choose their words with immense care, odd is not a synonym for coincidental. It does not simply mean unexplained. It signifies a deviation. It means something is breaking the established pattern. And in an active federal kidnapping case, a break in the pattern is never insignificant background noise. It is a thread. Today, we are following that thread to its conclusion, examining the entire camera landscape at 7351 East Placida, Baja. Before exploring what the backyard cameras did or did not record, let's first establish the known facts about the surveillance architecture at Nancy Guthrie's home. This is what is known, sourced, and verified. Setting aside the speculation that has populated social media, the front doorbell nest camera is a confirmed element. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has publicly confirmed that it was disconnected at approximately 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. The images that the FBI managed to salvage frames, captured moments before the camera went dark, were procured through a complex coordination with Google's back-end server systems. This detail is reported and verified by multiple mainstream news outlets. This is not a point of contention. We now turn to the property itself. Nancy Guthrie's residence, situated in the Sabino Canyon area of Tucson, occupies a residential plot with access to a backyard, a pool, and space along its sides. As is common for many homes in this part of Tucson, especially those where security is a significant consideration, the property was equipped with additional cameras beyond the primary front door unit. According to sources who were briefed on the official investigation, and later cited by ABC News, federal agents recovered imagery from motion-activated cameras positioned to monitor the backyard, the side yard, and the pool area. These were not devices that recorded continuously. They were motion-activated units, the kind designed to capture still frames or brief video clips when their sensors are triggered, creating what sources have characterized as thumbnail images. I want to be very precise about this particular detail, the characterization of these images as thumbnails, because the sourcing is critical here. This description originates from ABC News, attributed to sources briefed on the investigation. It has not received formal confirmation from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, nor has it been stated on the record by the FBI, yet it was reported by a credible news organization and has not been challenged by subsequent reporting. I highlight this fact because it stems from a single outlet's attribution, not because there is any reason to question its validity. Let us, then, summarize the established facts. The confirmed surveillance picture begins with a front doorbell Nest camera, which was confirmed to have been disconnected at 1:47 a.m. It was confirmed that the Federal Bureau of Investigation recovered motion-activated cameras monitoring the backyard, the side yard, and the pool, and that their imagery was successfully retrieved. This recovered imagery consisted of thumbnail stills, captured each time the cameras detected movement. The pressing question became, what exactly had been recorded on those stills? The same sources at ABC News report that in the time preceding February 1st, not on the night of the abduction itself, but in the days leading up to it, those cameras had been activated on numerous occasions by several different people. Several individuals were captured in the backyard and side yard of Nancy Guthrie's residence on various occasions before she vanished, and those images are now in the possession of the FBI. This is a detail worth pausing on, a critical piece of information, because everything that comes next, every single question surrounding the events of February 1st, must be filtered through the lens of this unsettling fact. The claim of smashed cameras, first reported by a Banfield source. This is the point where the narrative deepens in complexity and where the discipline of verifying sources becomes absolutely paramount. Ashley Banfield's Drop Dead Serious podcast, an outlet that has aggressively pursued sources close to law enforcement in this investigation, broadcast a claim that dramatically alters the understanding of the camera evidence, far beyond just the front doorbell. Citing a source described as possessing knowledge of the police investigation, it was reported that the front doorbell camera was not the only piece of equipment targeted on the night of February 1st. This source asserted that Mrs. Guthrie had multiple cameras at her residence, and that these cameras were deliberately destroyed. This allegation, and it must be stated explicitly that it comes from a single, uncorroborated source, is that numerous cameras throughout the property were smashed, and that the destruction extended even to the exterior lighting. A significant number of outdoor lights were reportedly rendered inoperable. This is a detail that requires careful handling. As of this report, the detail concerning the destruction of multiple cameras and lights has not been independently verified by any other major news organizations. The information originates solely from Banfield's reporting, based on one individual. That individual could be entirely correct, or they might be operating with an incomplete picture of the facts. Another possibility is that the account contains a kernel of truth. Perhaps other cameras were damaged, but the full extent of the claim is an exaggeration. The truth remains unknown. What is certain, however, is that this entire claim rests on a single source, a point that cannot be overemphasized. But for a moment, let us consider the implications if this claim were, in fact, accurate. If an intruder methodically smashed numerous cameras and disabled exterior lights around the property's perimeter on the night she was taken, going well beyond the front doorbell, that act would reveal a specific and calculated level of operational planning behind the entire event. The destruction of multiple exterior lights and cameras is not the action of an improviser. It is the action of someone who has already mapped the property. It signifies an intimate knowledge of the locations of every camera and every light fixture. It suggests a deliberate decision-making process to neutralize specific threats to their anonymity. In law enforcement circles, this degree of preparation has a name. It is known as pre-operational surveillance. And if multiple cameras and lights were indeed targeted, it strongly implies the work of someone who had conducted that surveillance. But this is where a significant complication arises. It is the precise point where Banfield's claim collides directly with the reporting from ABC News. If, as claimed, multiple cameras were destroyed, if an assailant systematically dismantled the security infrastructure on the home's exterior, then why were the cameras in the back and side yards left completely untouched? Why did those specific devices survive? This is far more than a minor inconsistency. If one were engaged in a targeted campaign to destroy cameras as part of the abduction, yet failed to disable the ones in the backyard and side yard, it means one of two things. Either you were unaware of their existence, or you made a conscious choice to leave them operational. And considering those same cameras had been recording people in that very yard for days, individuals who must have known they were being filmed, the theory of simple ignorance becomes difficult to sustain. Which leads to the most perplexing part of this puzzle. The cameras that were left untouched. The ones that were allowed to keep watching. It is worth examining this in detail, as it may be the most analytically significant element of all the camera evidence. The camera in the backyard. The one monitoring the side yard. The device providing coverage of the pool. Each of these units was recovered by the FBI completely intact, not smashed, not disabled, and still affixed to their mounts. Reports indicate the cameras were fully operational and their data was accessible. There are three principal explanations for why these specific cameras were spared on the night of the abduction. And whichever of these explanations proves to be the most plausible will reveal a great deal about the true nature of this crime's planning. The first explanation, the perpetrator, or perpetrators, were simply unaware that these other cameras existed. Overwhelmed by the urgency and inherent chaos of the abduction, the need to get in, secure Nancy, and then get out, their focus was tunneled on the most obvious threat, the front doorbell camera, causing them to overlook the units in the back. While this scenario is possible, its credibility weakens considerably when we factor in the critical detail that these very same backyard cameras had already recorded multiple individuals on numerous occasions just days earlier. If you, or an accomplice, had spent time on that property repeatedly in the preceding days, near enough to be registered by motion-activated surveillance, you were acutely aware of their existence. You had passed them on previous occasions. Your image had already been recorded by them. A second explanation. The cameras in the backyard were positioned in a location that was either difficult to reach or presented an additional risk of exposure. Perhaps the extra time and danger involved in approaching the rear of the property to neutralize those cameras was deemed an unacceptable risk. It's possible the primary objective was the front doorbell, as that camera was most likely to record a clear, street-facing identification, rendering the backyard cameras a secondary consideration. This theory is more credible, and it aligns with a scenario where the main point of entry was the front of the home, making the rear of the property less critical to the operation. A third explanation. The cameras were left intact not because they were incapable of capturing anything significant, but because an unseen hand had already made certain that whatever they recorded on the night of the abduction would never become a liability. This is the theory that I believe investigators are considering with the utmost gravity, judging by the specific language that sources have employed. It's a conclusion drawn from the description of that night's footage as odd, and it is consistent with the meticulous planning and precision that have defined this case from its inception. If you possess intimate knowledge of those cameras, if you have been on that property and studied their angles of coverage, if you comprehended their motion detection zones, you could navigate the backyard entirely without activating them. It would be possible to map out an approach and an exit that completely bypasses their fields of view. Or, and here the hypothesis becomes more technically intricate, you wouldn't need to physically evade them at all, because you had already guaranteed they would not be recording what they saw. The problem of the thumbnail, and what these motion-activated cameras are actually designed to do, it is critical to pause and examine the technology, because a precise understanding of how these cameras function is fundamental to appreciating the profound significance of the missing footage. A motion-activated camera is not analogous to a dash cam. It does not record a continuous video feed that one can simply review from beginning to end. It is a device triggered by sensors. When its infrared or pixel change detection system senses movement within its designated zone, the camera powers on and captures imagery, usually a quick series of still photos or, in certain models, a brief video clip. These captures are assigned a timestamp and are either stored on a local device or uploaded to cloud-based storage. For investigators, this means the evidence provided by these cameras is not a seamless timeline to be watched. It is, instead, a log of specific events, a sequence of time-stamped images that correspond to the precise moments when motion was registered. In the absence of detected motion, no capture is created. No footage exists. There is only a void in the activity log. The FBI's ability to recover imagery from the cameras on the back and side of the house means they are in possession of that log, complete with its timestamps. They have the thumbnail images that correspond to every single motion event those cameras ever detected. And in the days preceding February 1st, that log shows consistent activity, numerous captures, various individuals, on multiple occasions. Yet on the night of February 1st, during the precise window in which Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home, that very same log contains, according to sources, nothing suspicious. Let us now consider the scenarios that could lead to such an outcome. For a motion-activated camera to fail to generate any captures during a period when an individual is moving through its field of view, one of several conditions must be met. Either no one actually moved through that zone, or the motion detection system was compromised due to a malfunction, external interference, deliberate tampering, or the captures were indeed created, but were never successfully transmitted or saved. This implies that something severed the connection between the sensor's trigger and the final stored record within a functional, internet-connected camera system. That connection is a clear sequence. A sensor detects motion, the camera activates, an image is captured, that image is sent via Wi-Fi to the cloud service linked to the device, and the image is then stored on remote servers. If this chain is broken at any link, if the Wi-Fi is disrupted, if the cloud account becomes inaccessible, if the camera is rebooted, if the account's credentials are altered, the capture might occur on the device itself, but fail to ever enter the accessible official record. Alternatively, the detection event itself could be suppressed through remote account access, depending entirely on the system's architecture. I will delve deeper into the angle of remote access in a few moments, but it is vital to establish this technological framework first, because it is of central importance. The void of footage from these cameras on the night of February 1st is not the same thing as the cameras being non-existent. It is also not the same as those cameras simply failing to be triggered. Depending on the system's mechanics and the events that transpired, the absence of a record can mean something far more sinister than the absence of activity. In the precise language of a federal kidnapping investigation, what does odd truly signify? We must return to that single word from the news source, because its profound importance may have been overlooked. The official characterization of the night's footage as containing nothing suspicious, and the subsequent description of that very finding as odd. These are not idle words, they are vital pieces of a puzzle. When an individual with intimate knowledge of a federal kidnapping probe, someone privy to the granular details of the evidence, labels a discovery as odd, they are not engaging in casual conversation. They are signaling an anomaly, an element that defies the established pattern, an inconsistency that, when measured against the totality of the evidence, creates a jarring dissonance. To understand the gravity of this, consider the following. Had the abduction been a simple front-of-house operation, with the breach happening entirely within the view of the front door camera, then a lack of activity recorded in the backyard would hardly be considered odd. On the contrary, it would be entirely expected. No investigator would find significance in a blank recording if the backyard was never considered part of the crime scene. The use of that specific word, odd, reveals a critical insight. Investigators approach that footage with a preconceived expectation. They believe those cameras should have recorded something crucial, yet they found nothing. What could possibly form such a specific expectation? Two key elements. The disquieting pre-abduction footage showing several individuals on the property days prior, and the evolving theory of a meticulously planned staging and approach. If the investigators' working theory, supported by other evidence, posits that Nancy Guthrie's abductors used the rear of the property for their approach or as a staging ground, then the silent backyard cameras on that night are not merely inactive. Their silence becomes a deafening anomaly. Consider the cold logic of the investigation. You have functioning cameras that documented human presence in the days leading up to the event. A violent crime then occurs at that exact location. Logically, you would turn to those same cameras, anticipating the capture of a triggering event. An individual traversing the backyard, a shadowy figure moving along the side of the home, maneuvering into position for an attack, and yet you find a void. That absence is the finding, not the footage, but the absolute lack of it. This is precisely the type of discovery that seasoned federal agents, veterans of kidnapping and homicide cases spanning 20 or 30 years, characterize with one understated word, odd. It's odd because it points to one of two chilling possibilities. Either the surveillance system, due to its specific placement, genuinely failed to capture the event, perhaps because of a technical malfunction, or an entry vector that skillfully bypassed its field of view. Or, the cameras didn't miss it. They were deliberately prevented from recording. In this scenario, the blank footage is not a technological limitation. It is the fingerprint of a sophisticated methodology. This critical distinction between cameras that incidentally miss an event and cameras that are intentionally defeated is arguably one of the central, unresolved questions of this entire case. Which brings us to the people in the backyard. Let us now return to that pre-abduction footage, a detail that has been alarmingly overlooked in the public discourse surrounding this case. Sources with direct knowledge of the investigation reported that the motion-activated cameras in the backyard and side yard of Nancy Guthrie's home captured, in the days preceding February 1st, several people, not a single person, nor an ambiguous shape at the periphery of the lens. The recordings show several distinct individuals, on more than one occasion. Consider for a moment the profound investigative weight of that discovery. In any abduction scenario, and particularly in one the FBI has characterized as a targeted attack rather than a crime of opportunity, the pre-operational surveillance phase becomes a paramount area of focus. To execute the abduction of a person from their own home, under the cover of darkness, in a quiet neighborhood, and on a strict timeline, is not an act of improvisation. It is an act that requires meticulous reconnaissance. The perpetrators would need to survey the property. They would need to study the patterns of life within. They would methodically identify every vulnerability, the placement of cameras, the location of exterior lights, the integrity of the locks, the bedroom of the target, and the precise moment the home falls into silence. And this critical intelligence gathering occurs in the days leading up to the attack, not on the night itself. The reality that these cameras recorded multiple individuals in the preceding days, close enough to trigger motion sensors, is far more than an incidental detail. It is, potentially, the entire pre-operational surveillance phase captured on video. Now, it is crucial to be transparent about what remains unknown, because the gaps are significant. The identities of these individuals remain a mystery. While the FBI possesses the images and is actively working to put names to the faces, there have been no public reports confirming whether any of these persons of interest have been successfully identified, whether they are known to the Guthrie household, or if they have any ties to other suspects in this investigation. It is also unknown if their presence can be innocently explained, perhaps a pool service crew, landscapers, or even neighbors who had access to the property. The alternative is that their purpose was far more sinister. But here is what we know with certainty. The FBI deemed these images significant enough to be entered into the official investigative record, and sources privy to that investigation considered them important enough to reveal their existence to journalists. This is not the kind of footage that investigators can simply write off with a straightforward explanation. And this reveals a connection of critical importance. Unidentified individuals were observed in the backyard and side yard on several occasions in the days preceding the abduction. Yet, on the night in question, those very same cameras recorded nothing suspicious. If the figures captured in the preceding days were, in fact, conducting pre-operational surveillance, if their purpose was to map the layout of the property and test the trigger zones of the motion sensors, to learn the precise angles of the cameras, then by the time February 1st arrived, they would possess an exact understanding of what those lenses could and could not capture. They would be intimately familiar with the coverage zones. They would have identified every single blind spot. They would know with certainty whether their approach on the night of the abduction would trigger an alert or if they could move completely undetected. This kind of pre-operational surveillance is not merely about gathering intelligence. It is a meticulous assessment of risk. An offender visits the property in the days prior for one reason: to fully comprehend the environment they are about to enter. And if one were to enter that backyard repeatedly in the preceding days, observing the cameras activate and noting where the preview thumbnails were generated, they would possess a precise mental map of the camera's visual limitations. This implies that on the night of February 1st, the perpetrator either deliberately remained outside of those coverage zones, or they had engineered a way to ensure the cameras posed no threat, no matter where they moved. Either of these possibilities demands a level of operational sophistication fundamentally at odds with the profile of a random stranger, an opportunist, or someone driven by impulse. Both scenarios point toward an individual or individuals who were intimately familiar with this property. Which brings us to the Nest system and the crucial Google angle. There is another layer to the surveillance picture, one that has been critically underreported, and it connects directly to the FBI's methodology as well as the overarching question of this crime's design. The front doorbell at the Guthrie home was, in fact, a Nest camera, a product owned by Google. The reason federal investigators could retrieve footage from this device, even after it had been physically disabled, is because of the nature of Nest cameras. Like all devices within the Google Home ecosystem, they operate through a cloud-connected infrastructure. The video feed is not stored exclusively on the physical device. It is transmitted to and saved on Google's servers, even if only temporarily. Consequently, when the FBI needed to recover that data, they submitted a direct request to Google. This very process, the FBI collaborating with Google to extract back-end data from a Nest camera that was physically tampered with, has been verified by multiple mainstream news reports. This coordination is not speculation. It is a confirmed fact. This leads to a question that has not been posed with sufficient public scrutiny. Were the backyard and side yard cameras part of that same integrated system? Were they also Nest devices, operating under the identical Google Home account? This is a detail that has not been publicly confirmed. It has never been definitively reported, and the answer to that question fundamentally alters the entire analysis of the crime. If those cameras were indeed part of the same Google Home ecosystem, the same account, the same cloud infrastructure, then the individual who disabled the front doorbell at 1:47 a.m. was acting inside a system they already understood. They possessed, at a minimum, enough familiarity with that setup to locate and interfere with the camera. The question is whether this familiarity stemmed from access to the account credentials, from simple physical proximity to the device, or if they merely knew its physical location and acted manually. In any case, they were operating within that system's digital footprint. And if they had gained account-level access to that system, every connected device, including the backyard cameras, would have been vulnerable. Google Home accounts, by design, can be managed from anywhere. Settings for each camera, such as motion detection sensitivity and recording modes, even notification preferences, can be altered through the application from any location with an internet connection. If an intruder had the login for the Google account tied to those cameras, they could, depending on the specific configurations of the devices, remotely adjust or even suppress the camera's functions without ever physically touching them, leaving behind no broken mount, no shattered lens. To be perfectly clear, I am not asserting that this is definitively what occurred. This scenario has not been reported as a confirmed finding by any official source. What I am highlighting is that the technical pathway for such an action exists, and it is entirely consistent with the known evidence. Consider the facts: intact cameras, a complete absence of footage on the night of the abduction, and an investigative source who registered this discrepancy as odd. If the FBI's deep dive into the Google backend data yielded more than just the footage from the doorbell, if the recovery of that account's complete history revealed access logs, login events, and the activity of the backyard cameras, then that information is now in the hands of investigators. And it would paint a very specific picture of whether those cameras were tampered with and from what location. We do not know the full extent of what the FBI discovered within that back-end data. We only know for certain that they were in it. And we also know the backyard cameras recorded nothing unusual on the night Nancy was taken. These two facts, considered side by side, warrant far more scrutiny than they have received. This brings us to the timeline, centering on 1:47 a.m. To comprehend the events of February 1st, we must construct a timeline from the verified electronic records. It is only when laid out in sequence that the gaps in the narrative become starkly visible. At approximately 1:47 a.m., the front doorbell camera, the home's primary digital eye, ceases transmission. This is the official timestamp, confirmed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Whatever transpired at the front of the house, the neutralization of that camera, the approach, the breach it happened at, or just before that critical moment. But what of the backyard cameras, those motion-activated sentinels? What was their status on the night of February 1st? Did they record thumbnail images until a certain point and then suddenly fall silent? Did their activity cease before 1:47 a.m. or after? Or is it possible they continued to function normally, capturing nothing of consequence throughout the entire night? This particular detail, while not public, is of enormous significance to the investigation. If those cameras stopped logging any motion events, in the hours leading up to 1:47 a.m., it paints a specific picture. It suggests the detection fields around those cameras were either clear of all activity or that something rendered them inoperative before the front doorbell was taken offline. Such a scenario could point to a carefully planned approach, one that deliberately bypassed those electronic tripwires. Alternatively, it could suggest a form of remote interference that preceded any physical action at the front of the property. However, if those cameras were generating routine, ambient captures throughout the night, the stray movements of a neighbor's cat, the sweep of passing headlights, the typical false alarms that plague motion sensors, and then stopped precisely when the front doorbell went dark, that paints an entirely different scenario. This would imply a synchronized event, a coordinated assault on multiple security systems at once, and if the cameras were capturing images all night long, even during the very window the abduction took place. Yet none of the images reveal anything suspicious. No human shapes, no approach from the rear of the property, no activity inconsistent with the deep stillness of night. Then the fundamental question becomes about the method of entry and whether the theory of a frontal assault can still hold. An insider's characterization of the footage as odd is a powerful indicator that investigators are struggling with these very scenarios, lacking a clear and satisfying explanation. If the camera evidence were simple, if the backyard footage plainly showed nothing because the entire event was confined to the front, an informed source would not describe it as odd. They would describe it as consistent. The fact that it is called odd implies the pieces of the puzzle do not fit together cleanly. This suggests that the timeline surrounding 1:47 a.m. is far more complex than a single timestamp from a disabled doorbell camera would lead one to believe. This brings us to the theory of remote electronic tampering. It is here that we must clearly delineate the line between established evidence and the analysis that follows. These are the known facts. The cameras in the backyard and side yard were not physically damaged. The FBI recovered these devices completely intact. We know these cameras captured thumbnail images in the days preceding the abduction. They recorded multiple individuals on multiple occasions. Yet on the night of February 1st, these same cameras registered nothing suspicious. A source with knowledge of the findings called this odd. This is the factual foundation upon which any further analysis must be built. Modern residential smart cameras, the very type one would expect in a security-conscious home in Tucson, the kind that generates the thumbnail images described in news reports, are all network devices. They function on embedded operating systems, they connect via home Wi-Fi networks, and they are controlled through cloud-based applications. And like any network device that operates within an account-based cloud architecture, they possess access points that can be manipulated from a distance. The most direct method of remote camera interference does not involve hacking in the cinematic sense. It does not necessitate breaking military-grade encryption or exploiting unknown system vulnerabilities. The most direct method simply requires access to the user account. With the login credentials for the household smart home system, the email address, and the password, one can log in from any device on Earth and assume control of those cameras. From there, one can alter settings. In certain systems, one can temporarily deactivate motion detection altogether. Cameras can be forced into privacy modes. Depending on the system's architecture, an intruder can dictate what is recorded and what is deliberately ignored. And this is the crucial element that connects to the wider investigation. If an individual had insider knowledge of the household access to the residence, its network, its devices, acquiring those credentials would not be a technically difficult task. The information could be written down or perhaps saved in a web browser. It might have been shared with a person who had legitimate reasons to access the system, or it could have been quietly obtained by someone who spent time inside the home and was given the opportunity to observe. It is crucial to state that this is a theory, not a confirmed fact. No official source has reported that a remote account compromise has been identified as a definitive finding in this investigation. Yet the framework for this theory exists, and it aligns with a crime that has displayed, from its very inception, the hallmarks of meticulous, advanced planning, and perhaps even insider access. The alternative theory that the cameras captured nothing because the abduction occurred entirely within their blind spots is not beyond the realm of possibility. However, this would require us to believe that an individual, present in that very backyard on multiple occasions in the preceding days, an individual who had repeatedly triggered those motion sensors before, could then orchestrate an abduction at the residence on the night of February 1st, while avoiding every single one of those same sensors. It is conceivable, Yet law enforcement sources seem unconvinced, labeling the situation with a single, telling word, odd. This leads to the specter of insider knowledge. When we assemble all the pieces we have examined today, laying them out in chronological order, the surveillance evidence, viewed as a whole, constructs a very distinct narrative about the preparation behind this crime. The concept of insider access, the so-called backdoor theory, has been a subject of extensive speculation. This is the notion that a person with intimate knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's home, its layout, its patterns of life, and its security infrastructure was either a direct participant or supplied critical intelligence to the perpetrators. The surveillance timeline, when scrutinized, supports this theory of insider knowledge in a specific, verifiable manner. Consider what someone with privileged access to this property would inherently know. They would know the precise location of the doorbell camera. They would understand its field of view, the front walk, the street, the driveway, and any person approaching the main entrance. They would recognize this camera as the single greatest threat to their anonymity if they approached from the front of the house, and they would conclude it had to be neutralized. They would also be aware of the cameras in the backyard, and crucially, that they were motion activated. They would have a working knowledge of the coverage angles, the specific zones those cameras monitored, and where their sight lines ended. They would know the Wi-Fi network that powered those cameras, and with access to the account that controlled them, they would possess the means to manipulate them from afar. Now, let us superimpose this hypothetical knowledge onto the physical evidence. The front doorbell camera was targeted and disabled. That aligns. The backyard cameras were not physically damaged, not destroyed, but recovered fully intact. In the days leading up to the event, these same backyard cameras recorded several individuals, people who seemed to be aware of the camera's presence. They were documented on video during what could be interpreted as a pre-operational reconnaissance phase. Then, on the night of the abduction, the backyard cameras recorded nothing suspicious, a detail that remains deeply unsettling. If one were to architect a crime armed with intimate knowledge of this home and its defenses, the execution would almost perfectly mirror what is believed to have happened. You would physically eliminate the camera posing the most significant identification risk. You would address the backyard cameras with a different strategy, perhaps through remote account access or by moving with surgical precision through their known blind spots, or by confining the entire operation to the front of the property, where the primary camera was already being taken offline. The fingerprint of an insider is not always in the actions taken. At times, it is found in the deliberate inaction, and why that which was left undone ultimately made no difference. The backyard cameras were not destroyed, yet they failed to capture any incriminating activity. It is this specific combination of facts that investigators are reportedly fixated on, based on sourcing and the narrative of evidence that has slowly taken shape in the months since February 1st. Allow me to outline what the active investigative threads surrounding the camera evidence most likely resemble. As of this moment, the footage from the front doorbell, whatever the FBI managed to retrieve from Google's servers, is presumably a settled piece of the puzzle. Investigators have possessed it for months. Whether or not it led to an identification, its contents have been thoroughly dissected. The backyard and side yard footage, specifically the pre-abduction thumbnails showing several individuals, is likely the subject of an ongoing identification mission. The FBI is in possession of those images. They have been cross-referencing them with databases, known associates, and anyone with a plausible reason to be on that property before February 1st. Any progress from this effort has been kept from public view. The void in the timeline on the night of the abduction, the nothing suspicious from cameras that logically should have recorded something, is, in my assessment, the most vital and active thread of all. Not for the direct evidence it might provide, but because it helps to define the perpetrator's methodology. To comprehend why those cameras fell silent, or why they saw nothing, is to understand the very mechanics of how this crime was committed. And understanding the method inevitably leads you to the kind of person who possessed the knowledge and skill to employ it. The source who described the situation as odd is not done grappling with that question, and it's highly probable the FBI isn't either. That informational gap, those silent hours from cameras that had been diligently recording people for days, is an anomaly that cries out for an explanation. And when federal agents encounter a problem that demands an answer they do not have, they do not simply move on. Investigators scrutinize every facet, every possibility, until a coherent explanation emerges, or the evidence points them down an entirely new path. At this moment, that gap in the camera footage is the single thread they are pulling, hoping it will unravel the entire narrative. To truly grasp its significance, we must step back and consider where this camera evidence fits within the broader, disturbing landscape of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. A wealth of evidence has already established that this crime was not random, but rather a meticulously targeted abduction. The calculated precision of the approach, the chilling synchronicity of its timing, the theories of a staged scene, the lingering questions surrounding a second ransom note, and the potential for access through a concealed back door. Then there are the unsettling questions about a Pima County deputy, arrested in a separate kidnapping, and whether any dark connection exists to this investigation. Against this complex backdrop, the surveillance footage does not merely add another piece to the puzzle, it brings the existing pieces into sharper, more disturbing focus. Its power lies in the specific evidentiary window it opens, not into the abduction itself, but into the crucial preparation phase that preceded it. In the days just prior, unidentified individuals were present in that backyard on several different occasions. Throughout this period, the cameras were fully operational, dutifully logging motion events and generating image thumbnails. And then, on the night it all happened, an eerie stillness. If this were an opportunistic crime, the digital footprint would look nothing like this. A random assailant does not spend days conducting surveillance in their target's backyard before making a move. A random assailant does not disable a front doorbell camera with the gloved, practiced hands of someone who knows its exact placement. And a random assailant does not leave backyard cameras untouched in a manner that, either deliberately or incidentally, results in a complete void of footage. The camera evidence, when viewed in its totality, paints a clear and chilling picture, a targeted, pre-planned, and sophisticated abduction. This was an operation in which the perpetrators possessed an intimate knowledge of the property and its layers of security. It was an operation in which the approach to the camera evidence was entirely deliberate, whether through physical destruction, meticulous navigation of blind spots, or even remote digital interference. This is not the profile of a crime of opportunity. It is the profile of something orchestrated. This brings us to the open loop, the single, unresolved thread that defines the investigation's current state. The FBI is in possession of images captured by those backyard and side yard cameras in the days leading up to Nancy's disappearance. Multiple individuals, seen on several occasions. Those images are real, and the Bureau has them. Whether the figures in those photographs have been identified, and what that revelation might mean for this case, remains a closely guarded secret. Yet on the night of February the 1st, those very same cameras recorded nothing out of the ordinary, a finding that a source close to the investigation described not merely as notable, but deeply strange. That chasm between the documented pre-abduction activity and the absolute void of data on the night itself stands as one of the most critical unanswered questions in the Nancy Guthrie case. Why did the cameras go silent? Was it because the abduction unfolded entirely at the front of the home, far from the backyard cameras' view? Was it because someone moved through that property with such surgical precision that they remained completely hidden within the camera's blind spots? Was it because an unseen hand, with remote access to the system, digitally suppressed the recording functions, leaving no physical evidence of tampering? Or is there another explanation, one we have yet to even consider? Perhaps one that investigators already hold close, a key that makes the silence finally comprehensible. I do not have that answer. At this moment, no one outside the FBI task force does. What is certain, however, is that the source who labeled it odd is positioned to know that the mystery has not yet been solved. And until it is, until there is an explanation for why fully functional, motion-activated cameras in the backyard and side yard of Nancy Guthrie's home recorded nothing on the night she was taken from it, that silence will continue to speak volumes. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie of The Today Show. She was 73 years old at the time she was abducted from her residence in Tucson, Arizona. A federal kidnapping investigation remains active. If you possess any information relevant to this case, please contact the FBI's tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI or tips.fbi.gov. There is more to come in this case, and the threads we are following appear to be drawing closer to a dark and hidden truth.